So now we've talked about handling the success. What I want to talk about is handling the errors. So let's create a second argument. We'll pass it the handle error value, and then that means that we can create a constant. So what we're going to do inside of here is simply log out this particular error. So you can see that we have handle error. This is then going to give us an error object. So if we go ahead and log it out, we can hit save and then jump into the browser. Now for this, I'm going to change our location permissions to block, which means that it's going to ask us to refresh. And you see that we now have a geolocation position error message. We have user denied geolocation with a code of 1. We then can have a look at the prototype. Now you can see on this prototype object, we have permission denied with a value of 1, and we have position unavailable with a value of 2, and a timeout error with a value of 3. And then we also have the error code, which then corresponds to the type of error. So this is almost like an enum. So we could, for example, use the number 1 to denote the code, which then if we were to receive a position unavailable error, we would have a code of 2. Now the message is customizable if we want to customize our message, and this is something we'll come on to in the next lesson. So we have this permission denied, which we are in fact seeing because we've blocked the permission. We have position unavailable. So if we are out and about and our mobile device cannot give us an accurate reading, we might see a position unavailable. Similarly, we also have the timeout, which will be a particular error because we can in fact specify how long we want to wait until we essentially give up. We don't want to keep the user waiting for perhaps 2 minutes if it's taking that long to get an accurate position. So we can handle an error, we can throw a timeout. So this will then allow us to deal with those errors accordingly. Now what this will allow us to do is essentially use this error.code to then detect what kind of error it is. So if it is an error code of 1, we could go and look up the fact that it is in fact a position denied. So what this will allow us to do is do something like this, where we create a switch statement with the error code. So we want to take the error code, which is going to be 1, 2, or 3. Of course, we have the message in here as well. So what we can say is when there is a case of 1, we know that this is in fact the permission denied. So we can say console.log the error.message. We can then break our switch, we can hit save, and you can see that we have this user denied the geolocation. So let's go ahead and duplicate this because we want to just simply change these over to a case of 2 and a case of 3. Now in case of an error which we do not know of, we can say that we can have a default case and we can simply say that this will be an unknown error. So this gives us a nice way to detect and handle those errors. We can do something inside of case of 1, case of 2, and case of 3. Now, I don't know about you, but let's say we close our index.js and perhaps we come back to work on this file at a later date. We then say, oh, hang on a minute, I've forgotten what case 1 and case 2 and case 3 actually are, especially if we're using a dynamic error message, so we don't actually know anything about these. Now, because this error acts as a sort of enum, what we can in fact say, instead of asking for 1, 2, and 3, if we jump into our console again and just inspect this error, just to refresh your memory, we can jump down and see the prototype. You can see we have error.permission denied with a value of 1. So if we were to say error.permission underscore denied, this is then going to console log out the value of 1. So instead of doing this case 1, case 2, case 3, we can in fact be a bit more clever. So we can say when the case is error.permission denied, then we know it's going to give us a value of 1. We can then change this over to error.position unavailable. And then last but not least, we can have an error.timeout. So when we save this out, we see the exact same thing because this returns us a number of 1. So we can cleverly switch on the errors.code, and we can in fact close our file. We can come back to it at a later point in time, and we know which kind of errors. We've got a permission denied, position unavailable, and a timeout. So this is far cleaner. We don't need to add any code comments to try and explain our case 1, 2, and 3. So this is far nicer API for us. Now, instead of using this error.message, what we could in fact do is then go ahead and write our own error message. So instead of logging out the error message, it might be that we want to use this in a different language, or we don't like the bluntness of user denied geolocation. We could, for example, do exactly what I said and say, you denied geolocation, feel free to enable it again. And when we save this out, we get a more human readable and a bit more friendly error message that we might want to show in a particular pop-up to the user. So that is it for this lesson. We have demonstrated how to block our geolocation. We've looked at asking, we've looked at allowing. We've then covered the types of errors that we do in fact get. We've talked about using these enums and using a switch statement with our error code. We've then looked at using a case of 1, a case of 2, a case of 3, and a much more human readable form for handling those particular error messages. And I think this is a really clean solution for us, and it'll be nice and easy to then handle those particular errors based on which one they are. So if there is a permission denied, we can do something different than if the position was unavailable. Here we might want to retry after a certain amount of time. And if there is a particular timeout, we might want to do something similar as the position unavailable. It might be that what we could do is in fact do something like this and let the cases essentially be the same, because if the position's unavailable, we might want to then go and request it again. And if there is a timeout, similarly, we could go and request it again. But for now, we'll just leave it as is. If there is an error that we have no idea what it's about, we can then handle it as well and perhaps reload the page or do something similar. So that's a nice little dive into error handling. What we're going to look at in the next lesson is some advanced geolocation options that we can pass in to our get current position.